So let's talk through the datasheets of the Sons of Sanguinius and which of the Blood Angels are looking stronger and weaker in their recent Codex. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Blood Angels, and in this video I thought we'd do a tier list of Blood Angels datasheets, talking through a few thoughts as to which Blood Angels units are strongest and weakest right now. As ever, tier lists in 40k can be a bit arbitrary. Some things could be ranked a little bit higher or lower depending on the army, context of play, and your personal playstyle. Detachments definitely could alter things a whole bunch as well. In reality, in 10th edition, each detachment would have its own slightly tweaked tier list. For this one, I'm broadly going to focus on the Liberator Assault group though, given that the vast majority of people at the moment who are trying to make strong Blood Angels army lists seem to be using that. Nowhere near as much love for the Angelic Host, unfortunately, so far in tournament play, even if it has some cool rules. For this one, to keep the focus on the actual Blood Angels, and not just do an entire tier list of every single unit in Codex Space Marines, for the other 80 or so datasheets that you talk about there, I'm going to mainly focus on the Blood Angels ones, though for the end of the video I thought I'd just mention a few of the stronger generic Space Marine picks that might be unusually good in Blood Angels versus anywhere else. In any case though, for this one I'm going to talk through the Blood Angels units, sorting them into 4 tiers of rough strength, starting with the units that feel are most overshadowed and weakest, and moving forward to the strongest ones. First up, for the weakest datasheets in Codex Blood Angels, we've got the 2 Blood Angels captains. I've chosen to both rank the Death Company captain and the Jump Pack Death Company captain here. They add a little bit of fighting melee with some big hitting power fist attacks and things to a Death Company squad. They feel like they just have the really quite big and obvious problem that they don't do the objective control mitigation that the chaplain does, which is really quite a big thing for the unit, given that they won't be able to take objectives or do secondaries or things if they desperately need to, outside of a few specific ones in any case. I feel like the +1 to wound is generally more helpful in melee versus the other buffs that they bring. They don't get the free stratagems or the big turn of melee that regular captains get, and they don't have the rather good benefits of the unique named chaplains for leading Death Company, which I think are going to be a big rival for these as well for the Jump Death Company. In any case, they're basically captain style datasheets with a 6+ feel no pain baked in, which isn't awful but isn't much. Reroll hits, which is okay but not going to add too much again given that they hit on 2s anyway, and then adding a bunch of power fist attacks at a cheapish price tag. The Death Company captain is 85 points and adds sustained hits 1 to the unit, which at least is a useful damage boost. And then the on foot one, it gives you a scout 6 inches for the Death Company, plus if he's slain in melee he can hand out some mortal wounds. I feel like at the moment for these guys they'd have to be a bit cheaper to really sell themselves versus the competition. Perhaps one of the biggest draws to take enhancements if you're trying to make the Death Company detachment work. But just in general, I feel like chaplains are going to be better for most people's purposes, given that they mitigate the objective control problem, and you can't have both a captain and a chaplain within the same Death Company unit. I guess maybe if you're going super heavy on the Death Company and chaplains are all over the board, perhaps there'd be a bit more argument for justifying these if there's a good chance that they might have the boost anyway, but I feel like most armies aren't running quite that much Death Company. Otherwise, moving up to tier 3, the single datasheet that are ranked as a kind of overshadowed one here is the Death Company Marines with bolt rifles. They're 90 points per 5 or 180 per 10, and basically are intercessors with bolt rifles, plus a sergeant with a power fist, and they get free overwatch or heroic intervention with rerolling the hit roll, a bonus eviscerator in the unit, rerolling hits in melee, and a 6+ feel no pain. At least on the face of that does sound like really quite a lot of benefits versus a bog standard intercessor squad, though it's maybe a bit of a false comparison, as it's not really like mainline intercessor squads tend to get taken for a sort of damage and defense sort of role in most army lists. The main attraction for them is often their sticky objective style rule. Again, like the rest of the Death Company, they do have their big downside that they become OC0 unless a chaplain's nearby, plus the unable to fall back thing. And I feel like for the role that you'd normally want to use them for, that really isn't all that great, particularly as they seem a bit harder to justify a chaplain for, given that besides a couple of specialists, most of the squad isn't quite as melee focused and won't get quite as much value from the +1 to wounds. I feel like for the on-foot version, they're probably just a little bit behind the chainsword variant, even if they are a little bit cheaper and they don't come with the free overwatch, which at least adds a little bit of value, I suppose. I feel like they're the sort of units that's kind of playable enough in more casual lists, where they're really not so bad for the raw stats, but maybe just tends to not stand out for any one battlefield role, maybe. Moving onwards and upwards though, and next up we have tier 2, Blood Angels datasheets that I feel have maybe a bit more to offer, though even within this one I feel like there's a few of these that I'd rank significantly above some of the others. One of the ones I'd rank basically towards the top is the Sanguinor, 140 points for a very fighty Guardian Angel lone operative. Really quite fast, fairly tough, and he gets fights first. He puts out quite lots of anti-elite attacks with strength 6, AP 3 and damage 2 with devastating wounds, maybe going up to 9 attacks at strength 8 in the Liberator assault group on the charge. Against a melee army, you could put him into reserve and allow him to do his sort of heroic intervention step onto the board. That can be really quite a powerful swing, as you could have an enemy melee infantry unit charge into one of your other units, and then he could just turn up to turn the tide, maybe hacking down 3 or 4 Space Marines before they get to swing, so the rest of the squad just bounces off whatever they were charging. And you could potentially have him manifest at some awkward angles, like the very end of the unit, where your opponent can't bring all their might to bear on him, or even tagging another unit in melee if the positioning is right. I think his main downside that maybe keeps him a little bit further from the top tier than previously is the great competition he has from Mephiston now. It is a bit weird how they're two units that have really quite a lot of similarities in the Codex, and it certainly seems that more people are leaning towards Mephiston after the update. I feel like you could certainly run both though, even if you may be going a bit heavy on the oddly fighty lone operatives. I'd probably put him either top of tier 2 or low tier 1. Kind of in a similar place, who would rank at either the very top of this tier or the bottom of tier 1 is Astrabath the Grim. The leader of the Death Company got far fightier in the Codex, 6 attacks at strength 7, AP 3 and damage 2 with devastating wounds and precision. Is really quite a lot of nastiness out of the Executioner's axe. Definitely quite a nice profile to add into a wider Death Company squad that want as much high AP and high damage as possible. For his unit, he allows them to fight on death, which is really quite a good counter to enemy melee units. Ideally, it means that he can just charge up, destroy a unit with his squad, and then if the enemy tries to do so in return, he'll take a big chunk out of them. And he also has his Massive Doom for devastating wounds on the charge, nice for low AP chainswords and mid AP eviscerators and power fists. I feel like both of those special rules are quite good ones, and his own profile is rather nice. I'd either rate him at the top of tier 2 or lower tier 1. I do think he's a genuinely good unit, maybe just not auto-include. I wouldn't have had anything against putting him in tier 1 myself. Before we move on, I thought I'd just give a quick shout out to the sponsor of today's video, which are Great Eye Studios, the makers of the rather popular Crimson Lords upgrades. A fairly new range of 3D printed parts for angelic heroes and power armor. I have a bunch of interesting and really quite detailed options to add some theme as to some otherwise maybe slightly generic looking Primaris models, which has certainly been a common talking point of the latest Blood Angels range. They recently had a Kickstarter on My Mini Factory, though for this one I'll focus on their printed bits that you can order in. They've got a whole bunch of different bits packs on offer available from Only Games, a print-on-demand service, links down in the video description, that ship worldwide. I was quite impressed by the sheer amount of stuff that they had on offer for these guys. They've got a whole bunch of different helmets and heads, plus some bear ones. Lots of themed and stylized shoulder pads with various different markings, including some that could work for the Death Company. And plenty of themed weapons and things, whether you want swords, spears, chainswords, hammers or shields. For the physical bits pack offerings, they're divided into a bunch of sets. This one's the core set, featuring a good selection of different heads and shoulder pads and things. Could be fairly general purpose. There's one that works with a Dreadnought, which could be a good way to add a lot more theme to the rather plain Death Company looking Dreadnought. There's a medic pack to kit bash a different alternative Sanguinary Priest. A Sacred pack that can add some wings to a Sanguinary Guard squad that I'm certainly thinking about for my own army. And a Rage pack to add a bit of Fallen Death Company vibe to a force, with a bunch of heads, shoulder pads and jetpacks and things with their classic stylized crosses. In any case, plenty of fun stuff. Feel free to check them out as an alternative source for a few cool Blood Angels bits. There'll be links down in the video description, and a big thank you to them for sponsoring the video. Moving on with the tier list, and next up we have the Sanguinary Priest. 90 points for an on-foot Primaris character redone for the new Codex, giving a 5+ feel no pain to his unit, and an extra pip of melee in his squad in close combat, which does work particularly well for things like assault intercessors with chainswords. Getting AP2 and AP3 on power fists is a world of difference versus AP1, which can certainly bounce off higher saves and armor of contempt. As a sort of support character, he can pair with a captain or lieutenant. A captain often tends to be at least a fairly popular pick, though it does mean that you're making an otherwise fairly cheap squad into a rather pricey one when he's around. I say in general he maybe feels like a bit of a secondary pick compared with the captain, maybe not doing quite enough to make the squad outright strong in melee, or at least to be general purpose enough to be able to take down the majority of threats in the game. But if you add another character in with a big fighty power weapon like a power fist captain, then that probably tips the balance. I'd probably rate him low tier 2. He could certainly have an enormous amount of melee power, say jumping out of a Land Raider with 10 Assault Intercessors and a Blood Angels Captain for a unit that would be at least a little bit harder to take down given the Feel No Pain. Next up, we've got the Death Company Dreadnought, who I think is interesting, but maybe just a bit on the overcosted side at 180 points, and as a result, I'd put him towards the lower end of this tier or upper tier 3. The new Death Company Dreadnought is basically a Brutalis with a new paint job, a big and tough defensive profile with that inbuilt 6+ Feel No Pain, dangerous high strength melee with AP 2 and damage 3 with big rerolls built in. I feel like I'd probably be most tempted to take the Talons over the Fists for him. I think that the single most interesting thing for him that could make him a bit of a problem unit to deal with is his Surge move. If you shoot him, then he can move d6 plus 2 inches towards the nearest thing, potentially jumping into combat with it, and that's not really what you want to happen on a mid-board objective. It could certainly make having units try and swipe the objective that he's on kind of problematic. Like the rest of the Death Company, he's got the big downside of OZ0 without a chaplain nearby, which kind of it works against the entire objective holding and skirmishing type thing. And compared with other units, it's maybe not quite as easy to coordinate with chaplains, so unless you have an army where there's loads of them around, his presence on taking and contesting points could be a little bit sketchy. Overall, I feel like he definitely has trade-offs versus the Brutalis. That one's cheaper, and while it doesn't get combat rerolls, it does get the big hitting mortal wound impact hits. And I feel like both are usable, though maybe not massively crazily stand out. I feel like he could probably afford to go down in cost just a little bit. So as I said, maybe lower tier 2 or upper tier 3 for him. Next up, we've got the Bar Predator at 135 points. This one's the last firstborn thing remaining for the Blood Angels in their book. Typically seen having really big overwatch with a Flamestorm cannon that can cook some enemy Space Marines rather well, plus a couple of heavy flamers. It's really quite a fast moving tank, being able to advance and shoot and then toast a whole bunch of things in the midboard. Pre-Codex it was getting at least a fair amount of competitive play, though I feel like it didn't really need the points increase that it got in the Codex. I think that has really just tipped the balance a little bit on making it a bit more niche, even if it's still very usable. It has always been a unit that rarely has much synergy with the actual core Blood Angels rules as well. It's not like they tend to be massively well known for their fire support choices. Next up for this tier, we've got the Death Company Space Marines. These are the ones that can take the bolt pistols and chainswords, as well as also getting the Power Fist and Eviscerator, the reroll hits, and the 6+ Feel No Pain. Their special rule on top of all that is getting sustained hits if the squad's got depleted at all, and then going up to sustained hits too if the squad's below half strength. Again, like the Death Company Dreadnought, I feel like these ones are maybe a bit more interesting, but still a bit more overshadowed than some. The 95 points just doesn't seem to be standout for their damage threat and their special rules and things, and I feel like the getting extra damage as your squad takes casualties tends to be a slightly weaker one in 40k. At the moment, I'm not really too sure that I'd rate them over things like Assault Intercessors plus Captains jumping out of Impulsors, which could be a pretty similar way that you could go for some Blood Angels Shock Assault. Despite that though, I don't think that they'd be a terrible choice, and could still be a very scary threat with a Chaplain for their +1 to wound, and then that bucket load of chainsword attacks and a few higher quality hits. Moving onwards and upwards though, here we have Tier 1, perhaps the Blood Angels unique units that I consider the very strongest right now. I think with a good chance to be the very top of the shop and perhaps the single most powerful Blood Angels miniature, we have Chief Librarian Mephiston. The Lord of Death is 125 points, and he just got a rather ridiculous datasheet change in the recent Codex. Just an all-round incredibly efficient lone operative model. Lone operatives tending to have a whole load of value just in their own rights to be able to counter enemy shooting, and maybe doubly so if you're a fight's first lone operative, as it means that you can neither shoot nor charge them easily. He's fairly fast with a 7-inch move and advance and charge, so he can get where he needs to. He's got really quite good defense for a lone operative with toughness 5, 6 wounds with a 2+ save and a 5+ invulnerable, plus a 4+ Feel No Pain. It means that on average you have to chew through 12 wounds at that profile, which definitely isn't nothing, and he gets on very well with Armour of Contempt as well. He does have a little bit of ranged threats that can go through a few elite infantry between his Fury Psychic Power and his Plasma Pistol. His melee I think compares at least fairly solidly with a bunch of his Blood Angels peers. 6 attacks at Strength 9, AP 3 and Damage D3, getting better on the charge in the Liberator assault group. Maybe the biggest downside for that being the D3 damage, just meaning he's not quite as reliable at say putting down things like enemy Space Marines, though he's quite good against 3 wound infantry, and is solid against vehicles even if a little bit swingy. The fact that he has fights first just makes him hard to charge and means he should take a chunk out of a squad even if they do catch up with him with something very scary, and makes heroic intervention a definite possibility for him. And then as if all that weren't enough, he also has the chance to lock enemies in melee and prevent them falling back, which definitely isn't particularly reliable, but when it happens it could be absolutely enormous, given that the opponent wouldn't be able to shoot Mephiston. Overall, he's just a pretty excellent skirmisher, maybe to be operating a little bit behind the front lines perhaps, getting some good value both between his lone operative utility and his outright damage and defense. Next up, we've got the Blood Angels captain at 80 points. This guy's only just a unique datasheet really. He's basically representing the unique wargear options of the Blood Angels themed captain. So the datasheet has an Inferno pistol, which is quite a nice sidearm that you might want instead of something like a bolt rifle or a plasma pistol perhaps, and also the option of a chainsword, which unfortunately due to 10th edition's free wargear thing is pretty much directly inferior. Regular captains are just generally pretty great for the Blood Angels. When he's on the charge in the Liberator Assault group and he triggers his once per game big melee damage boost, he'd be 9 attacks at strength 10, AP 2 and damage 2, or hitting on a 2+ with devastating wounds and potentially re-rolling wound rolls if he's attached to an Assault Intercessor unit. That's already really quite scary in general purpose, and he could add other things like say Red Rampage to the mix with that, which he could do as a free stratagem. It's quite nice to get there maybe with an Impulsor unless they're just foot slogging up the board, and can bear some good enhancements. The once per game fights first could be nasty enough, though he could also make good use of the sustained hits 3-1, triggering that when he has his big melee round, as just yet another multiplier to stack with the rest to really take down some big stuff. Next up we have the old regent of the Imperium Nihilus himself, Commander Dante. The chapter master of the Blood Angels is really quite efficient at 130 points, hitting really hard in melee with 8 attacks at strength 8, AP 2, damage 2 and lethal hits, and that now means that he gets up to strength 10 in the Liberator Assault group on the charge, really quite a nice breakpoint against a few units. He gives +1 to hit for his lead unit and +1 to advance and charge. Now the Blood Angels detachments can offer advance and charge in their own right. That means that he basically adds an extra 2 inches to his squad threat range, and while that doesn't sound like a lot, that's really quite a big deal in extending the area that his Sanguinary Guard or other unit could reliably threaten. It also means that if you wanted to do some deep strike things and gamble on some charges, then an 8-inch charge with a reroll is at least odds on out of reserve. Otherwise he also has battle shocks in melee if they matter. Occasionally they might prevent some stratagems, and I feel like he's most obviously good alongside Sanguinary Guard. With a big squad of 6 of them and the boss from the Liberator Assault group, he should be able to handle the vast majority of 40k threats in melee, charging in with a whole blaze of Golden Fury. Talking of the Sanguinary Guard though, I've also chosen to rank these here. 135 points for 3 of them, or 270 per 6. I feel like these guys were maybe just a little bit cheaper than I might have expected them to be, and just looked like quite an efficient unit all around. 3 wounds each at toughness 4 with a 2+ save, a 4+ invulnerable, and -1 to hit and wound in melee when led by a character. Basically not a million miles away from flying Terminators, even if the right profiles with good AP and damage 3 will make at least relatively short work of them. And they've got some pretty nice general purpose melee with their oncoming blades, strength 6, AP 3 and damage 2, and they're now the only Blood Angels jump infantry units that can field 100% multi-damage good AP weapons. As a result, they look like a pretty excellent squad for buffs and stratagems. It's probably between these and the Death Company Marines with jump packs. It's nice to have them as a bit more of a scary threat in the Codex once more, even if their new miniatures might be a bit lacking in the wings department. Next up, I've chosen to rank Chaplain Lamartes here, 110 points for lethal hits and -1 damage for Jump Death Company. Hard to go too far wrong with that. Lethal hits just makes them a very well-rounded unit that can already handle most lighter infantry things quite well, but that helps them punch up against tough stuff. And the -1 damage is really quite a nice counter to things that would likely kill a marine in one shot, things like damage 2 and damage 3 attacks. Damage 2 would go to damage 1, and then damage 3 would go down to damage 2, but there'd still be a good chance that a standard marine might be able to tank some damage with its feel no pain. His own melee threat is okay, a few attacks at strength 6, AP 2 and damage 2, also with the lethal hits, definitely doesn't hurt, and overall I feel like he's just really quite a nice well-rounded leader for a big scary Death Company block that with its free rolls and eviscerators and things should have enough damage to take on most things in the game. Speaking of which, I have chosen to rank the Death Company Marines with jump packs here as well. They have one of those split points things where the smaller squad's 130 points and the bigger squad's 240. I guess in theory because the smaller squad gets slightly more power weapons as a ratio I guess, even if they often tended to be a bit more of a big all-in squad before. Compared with the Death Company on foot, they're a bit fightier because they get an extra power fist per 5 models, so a squad of 5 gets 2 fists and an eviscerator shared out between them, and a squad of 10 gets 3 Power Fists and 2 Eviscerators, so at least a good contingent of the squad having some fairly fighting melee weapons. They do also get built-in reroll charges as well as their standard reroll hits and feel no pain things for Death Company, so maybe just a little bit more reliable at hitting things at long threat range than some. Overall, I think they're solid enough. It does look like they have been seeing some good success in competitive play in some of the first few lists to hit tournaments, even if they are really quite a big investment unit, not really all that tough for the cost, and a good bit less threatening than when the entire squad had Power Fists and Inferno pistols to play with. After the tier 1 stuff, I probably would rank these towards the bottom end, they're still very solid. Finally, just to finish off, I thought I'd talk about a few of the more notable generic Space Marines. Just given the Blood Angels, +2 strength and +1 attack on the charge in the Liberator Assault group, plus the Red Rampage stratagem, literally anything that's Space Marine and at least somewhat efficient in Assault is going to be fairly good for the Blood Angels, and they're probably going to get far more value out of it than more standard Codex chapters. For standout good stuff, we'd already mentioned the Assault Intercessors, very nasty with captains and a 75-point squad of them, can punch far above its weight in Blood Angels and still have plenty of OC for objectives. Jump Intercessors are pretty amazing as well worth the 90 points for the Sons of Sanguinius, some mortal wounds and a Power Fist to at least threaten some tough stuff, then a massive amount of Furious Chainsword attacks at strength 6, which is a nice break point, and they're really quite a strong unit for the Angelic Host as well if you try out that one. The Vanguard Veterans I think are a little bit less further behind the Jump Intercessors than they used to be, either fancy pistols or sturdy storm shields plus a bunch of melee weapons with lethal hits on the charge. Their main weakness is only getting AP1, which is maybe a bit of a downside now the Jump Sanguinary Priest isn't a thing, or at least not outside Legends. Otherwise, standard captains and lieutenants are nice enough. Maybe lieutenants just a touch less emphasised given that you can get Red Thirst in the Liberator group. Chaplains are going to be great for the Death Company as well, particularly the on-foot version if you want to run on-foot Death Company Marines. The Jump version might have some stiff competition from Astarath and the Marties though. Otherwise, just about any other Space Marine melee elite is well worth considering. I feel like Blade Guard and Terminators are both maybe slightly underrated options for the Blood Angels, given the big focus that they tend to have on their jump units. Terminators in particular go from being sort of mid-ish in melee to genuinely scary. A massive amount of strength 10 attacks is so much better than a middling amount of strength 8. Maybe the biggest downside to them is that they've just got a little bit less chance of making the charge rather than being charged perhaps, as a lot of the bonus damage is dependent on charging the enemy, and that's maybe a little bit easier to do with very fast moving jump troops. Otherwise, probably worth just mentioning the non-melee jump troops, things like Inceptors that can drop close for secondaries, and Suppressors which can be a cheap unit to do secondary objectives, dropping in from the skies. Both of those could be handy enough objective doers, maybe having quite stiff competition from the Jump Intercessors in the more standard Liberator army, but if you're playing Angelic Host then these could be really interesting. Inceptors in particular could be kind of scary with the ability to return to reserve quite so easily, potentially bringing overwhelming force to one section of the map, and then disappearing off back into the skies. Finally, while we're on the subject of strong Blood Angels units, just worth mentioning a bunch of other strong stuff in Codex Space Marines. Plenty of Blood Angels lists tend to get some good value out of some scary shooting as well, just so you've got some options to take down some tough enemy stuff, particularly stuff that is shamefully hiding from melee. A Gladiator Lancer or two tends to be really quite a popular threat for hitting stuff and taking them down at long range, but lots of gun platforms work fairly well. The Ballistus Dreadnought at its lower points cost, the Predator tanks, the Vindicator which can move up quite aggressively, or maybe the Repulsor or Repulsor Executioner. The Redemptor Dreadnought's nice enough as well, and its melee gets better for them. For transport vehicles, the Impulsor could deliver some Assault Intercessors with Captains or some Blade Guard, as could the Land Raider. All the standard Space Marine objective support style units are nice enough. Scouts to take the midfield, Infiltrators to screen the backfield, particularly when everything else goes bounding forward. I still think it might be fine to mix in some more on-the-board firepower type units, things like Eradicators and Hellblasters. In general, they're not going to be seen in anywhere near as many Blood Angels competitive lists, they're still not awful. Plus it's always kind of funny when they just get seriously scary in melee against lighter troops and are well capable of just charging in and blasting through a bunch of enemy infantry with loads of strength 6 attacks on the charge. In any case, I'll leave that there for this one though. Let me know your thoughts as to the strongest and weakest Blood Angels units around. What have you been having success with on the tabletop, and would you have ranked things any differently? Finally, I'll just cycle back to the Crimson Lord upgrades made by Great Eye Studio, who sponsored the video. As mentioned, lots of cool themed upgrade packs available from only games if you want to get your hands on a bunch of fun things that could be appropriate for the Blood Angels. As mentioned, they've got loads of cool stuff, interesting stuff to represent sanguinary priests and things. Nice jump packs that could jazz up some sanguinary guard with some cool wings. And plenty of cross-shoulder pads and space vampires desperate for redemption, which certainly feels like a gap in the market from Games Workshop at the moment, given that there's pretty much literally no Death Company unique squad bits on sale at the moment. In any case, feel free to check them out, links down in the video description, if any of those look interesting, or to take a look at their range. In any case, I'll leave this one there for today. Look forward to hearing your thoughts on the Sons of Sanguinius. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more like this. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming, with new ones out just about every day, and hopefully we'll take a look at a few Blood Angels competitive army lists in the not so distant future. As always, if you'd like to help support the channel, feel free to check out the links in the video description between the Patreon page and the affiliate discount retailers linked in the video description if you happen to be buying any 40k stuff in the near future. But otherwise, I'll leave this one here for today. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.